My sister didn't just compete with me. She built her entire life on standing exactly where I was supposed to be. And I let her. For years. The night she announced her wedding date, the air in our parents' dining room felt heavier than usual. The chandelier cast warm light across polished wood, silverware clinked softly, and my mother was in one of her proud moods, the kind where her voice carried a shine to it. Stella cleared her throat dramatically. "You're going to love this," she said. She always said things like that. As if we were her audience. As if we were lucky to be. "We finally locked in the venue," she continued, smiling too wide. "And guess what? It's the same date as Clara's." She said it like a punchline. Everyone laughed. Everyone except me. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just felt something cold settle into my chest, not shock, not anger. Recognition. Of course it was the same date. Of course. My mother reached across the table and squeezed Stella's hand. "That's adorable," she said. "Two daughters, one special day." Two daughters. One special day. I had heard variations of that phrase my whole life. Two daughters. One spotlight. And I already knew who it belonged to. Stella turned to me. "You're okay with that, right?" she asked sweetly. Her voice had always been carefully calibrated, soft enough to sound harmless, sharp enough to wound. I lifted my glass and took a small sip of water. "I'm fine," I said. And that was the truth. I wasn't angry. I was awake. Because this wasn't new. This was just the loudest version of something that had been happening since I was 8 years old. That was the year Stella got her first modeling job. A small local catalog shoot. Nothing extraordinary. Unless you were my parents. They treated it like she just signed with a global agency. I remember standing behind the photographer, holding my backpack, waiting to leave for school. Mom adjusted Stella's curls over and over again. Dad crouched low for better angles. No one noticed I was still standing there. Eventually, I walked to school alone. I learned that day that applause is selective. And silence can be protective. In school, I excelled. Not because I wanted praise. Because I wanted proof. Proof that I existed outside her shadow. When I brought home perfect grades, my father didn't smile. "Don't make your sister feel bad," he said once. I was 13. I stared at the red 100 at the top of the page. It looked almost aggressive. Like it didn't belong to me. So I folded the paper. Carefully. I began folding everything after that. Report cards. Awards. Compliments. I made myself smaller in increments. Easier to overlook. On my 13th birthday, our cake had both our names written across it. "It's more practical," Mom said brightly. Stella blew out all the candles before I could inhale. Everyone laughed again. I clapped. I always clapped. Because if you clap loud enough, no one hears your own disappointment. High school brought its own lessons. I once told Stella about a boy I liked. Just a whisper while we were getting ready for school. The following week, she was holding his hand in the hallway. When I cried, my mother sighed like I was being unreasonable. "He prefers prettier girls," she said. That sentence stayed with me longer than the boy ever did. It reshaped something inside me. After that, I stopped sharing. Stopped volunteering information. Stopped expecting fairness. College funds were another quiet casualty. "Stella has more potential," Dad said when the discussion came up. Potential. I never asked what mine was. Instead, I got a job. An entry-level position at a logistics firm. Gray cubicle. Flickering fluorescent lights. Endless spreadsheets. It wasn't glamorous. But it was stable. And stability felt like oxygen. Over time, I became indispensable in small ways. I learned how executive calendars worked. How attendance policies shape decisions. How subtle influence traveled through email threads and meeting invites. I became observant, precise, patient. And patience is dangerous when underestimated. Years passed. I moved out. Built a life that was quiet but orderly. Then I met Daniel. He was steady in a way that didn't need attention. When we set our wedding date, it wasn't dramatic. It was simply right. Until Stella called. Her voice was syrupy. "So funny story," she said. I already knew. "We just confirmed our venue." Pause. "It's the same day as yours." Silence stretched between us. "You're doing something small anyway," she added quickly. "Most people will obviously come to ours." Obviously. There it was again. The assumption that I would yield. That I would adjust. That I would step aside. "Are you okay with that?" she pressed. I looked down at the circle I had drawn around our date. The ink was clean and deliberate. "Yes," I said softly. "I'm okay with it." And in that moment, I meant something entirely different than she thought. Because I wasn't going to fight her. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't even going to explain. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to move. And she had no idea what that meant yet. The morning after Stella's call, I woke up before my alarm. Not because I was upset. Because my mind was clear. There's a difference between reacting and deciding. For most of my life, I had reacted to her, to my parents, to circumstances that always seemed to favor someone else. This time, I decided. The apartment was quiet. Pale morning light slipped through the blinds and stretched across the hardwood floor. Daniel was still asleep, his breathing slow and even. I sat at the kitchen table with my planner open in front of me. Two circles stared back from the page. Same date. Same city. Same venue complex. Two weddings. One assumption. That mine would shrink. I traced my finger over the ink. I didn't cross it out. I didn't hesitate. Instead, I wrote one word beside it. Confirmed. Not dramatic. Not bold. Just final. When I arrived at the office that morning, everything looked the same as it always did. Coffee machine humming. Keyboards clicking. The faint scent of printer toner in the air. But something inside me had shifted. 9 years in the same company teaches you patterns. It teaches you who makes decisions, who influences them, and how information spreads. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't loud. But I was reliable. And reliability earns access. I logged into the internal system and opened a new draft email. Subject, Vance Miller Wedding Invitation. Simple. Professional. Below it, I typed carefully. Formal ceremony and reception. Executive attendance warmly requested. I paused. Then I adjusted one word. Requested became encouraged. In our company culture, that word carried weight. I didn't send it yet. I saved it. Strategy isn't about speed. It's about timing. By mid-morning, I called the venue coordinator. "Hi," I said evenly. "I'd like to confirm our booking." "Yes, Ms. Miller," she replied. "You're in Ballroom B, there is another wedding in Ballroom A the same day." "I know." There was a brief pause. "Would you prefer additional privacy adjustments?" "No," I said. "I'd prefer the grand ballroom." Silence on the other end. "That's Ballroom A," she clarified. "Yes. But that space is significantly larger." "I'm aware." "And the other booking?" "I'm sure they'll adjust." It wasn't cruel. It was procedural. Our contract allowed upgrades if requested before final confirmations. Stella had chosen quickly. I had chosen carefully. Within an hour, the ballroom shift was complete. Her hall. Now mine. When I told Daniel that evening, he didn't react immediately. He studied me the way he always did when something serious was forming. "You're not changing the date," he said quietly. "No." "And you're not confronting her." "No." He nodded once. "Then we do this properly." There was no excitement in his voice. Just resolve. We expanded the guest list. Not out of spite. Out of honesty. If people wanted to attend, they would choose. We hired a live quartet instead of a DJ. Reserved valet parking. Upgraded catering. I reached out to senior leadership personally. Short, respectful messages. "It would mean a lot to have you there." No manipulation. Just clarity. Over the next week, responses began to arrive. Yes. Of course. Wouldn't miss it. Looking forward to celebrating. The confirmation stacked quietly in my inbox. Meanwhile, Stella's social media filled with glossy updates. Bridal fittings. Champagne tastings. Captioned photos with phrases like "the main event." She tagged the venue repeatedly. She loved visibility. Visibility had always protected her. She didn't realize that influence doesn't live online. It lives in rooms. In relationships. In obligation. Mom called midweek. "Stella's planning something huge," she said brightly. "It's going to be breathtaking." "I'm glad," I replied. "You're still doing something small, right? Intimate?" "Yes," I said truthfully. Intimate. The guest list was growing, but the tone would remain controlled. Measured. Understated. "Make sure you come by her hall after yours," Mom added. "Family should be together." Family. The word felt heavier than usual. "We'll see," I said. That night, I opened an old storage box in my closet. Inside were folded papers. Report cards. Certificates. Small proofs of effort I had once hidden to avoid overshadowing her. I unfolded one. The red ink was still bright. Perfect score. I placed it beside our updated wedding itinerary. 2 pieces of paper. Years apart. Both proof that I was capable of more than they allowed. Daniel walked in and stopped when he saw them. "What's that?" he asked. "A reminder," I said. "Of what?" "That I was never small." He didn't respond with sympathy. He responded with pride. "Then let's make sure everyone sees that." The week before the wedding, the HR email was finally sent. Executive attendance strongly encouraged. Calendar blocks appeared across company schedules. It was subtle. No one would call it mandatory. But no one would ignore it either. By Friday, Stella called again. Her tone was sharper now. "Half of Nathan's clients are suddenly unavailable," she said. "Isn't that weird?" "I wouldn't know," I replied calmly. "You didn't?" "No. I didn't need to lie elaborately. I simply didn't explain." Silence unsettles people more than argument. "Are you sure you're okay with this?" she asked again. I almost laughed. "Yes," I said. More than ever. The night before the wedding, I stood by the window watching the city lights flicker. Daniel wrapped his arms around me from behind. "You're calm," he murmured. "I've been preparing for this my whole life." Preparing for what? To stop moving. Outside, rain began to fall softly against the glass. For years, I had stepped aside. Shifted. Adjusted. Reduced myself to keep the peace. Tomorrow, I wouldn't shift. I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't even raise my voice. I would simply exist in the space I had claimed. And let gravity do the rest. Stella thought this was a competition. She thought it would humiliate me. What she didn't understand was this. You can't humiliate someone who has already survived being overlooked. And you definitely can't outshine someone who finally decides to stand still. The invitations were sent. The ballroom was secured. The guest list was confirmed. The orchestra was booked. Everything was aligned. All that remained was the day itself. And the truth it would reveal. The morning of the wedding arrived without chaos. No dramatic sunrise. No trembling hands. Just a stillness that felt earned. I woke before my alarm again, but this time it wasn't strategy that kept me alert. It was clarity. Daniel was already awake, staring at the ceiling. "Big day," he said softly. "Yes," I replied. But not in the way everyone else thought. Outside, the city hummed as it always did. Traffic flowed. Coffee shops opened. Strangers walked past each other without knowing two weddings were about to unfold under the same roof. Two narratives. One address. When we arrived at the hotel, staff moved briskly through the lobby. Floral arrangements were being wheeled toward elevators. Garment bags hung from brass racks. Champagne glasses clinked faintly somewhere down the hall. And there they were. Two signs. Grand Ballroom, Miller Wedding. East Hall, Stella and Nathan. Side by side. I paused for half a second. Not out of nerves. Out of recognition. This was the moment everything shifted from theory to reality. Stella had chosen the larger hall originally. The grand one. The one she thought would impress. Now her name was printed beneath the smaller venue. Procedural. Contractual. Final. Daniel squeezed my hand once before we stepped toward our suite. Inside, the room was quiet. My dress hung near the window, ivory fabric catching morning light. I ran my fingers over the material slowly, grounding myself in something physical. There would be no confrontation. No dramatic speeches. Just presence. Downstairs, guests began arriving earlier than expected. Executives in tailored suits. Colleagues with understated gifts. Daniel's father greeted people personally, his handshake firm and warm. I watched through a slightly open door as the ballroom filled. Steadily. Purposefully. Not with noise. With certainty. Meanwhile, word filtered through the staff corridors. East Hall is still setting up. Several cancellations. Something about corporate conflicts. I didn't ask for updates. They arrived anyway. At noon, the string quartet began. Soft notes rising toward the chandeliers. The ceremony started precisely on time. Daniel stood at the altar, composed but unmistakably proud. When the doors opened and I stepped inside, I didn't look for my sister. I didn't look for my parents. I looked straight ahead. The room was full. Not packed for spectacle. Full for intention. As I walked down the aisle, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph. Not vindication. Relief. Because for once, I wasn't adjusting to someone else's narrative. I was living my own. Our vows were simple. No theatrics. Just promises made clearly and confidently. When Daniel said, "I choose you," it didn't echo. It settled. When I said, "I do," applause followed, warm, grounded, sincere. Through the tall windows behind the guests, I caught a glimpse of movement outside. White fabric. Fast steps. A flash of frustration across a familiar face. Stella. Her smile was gone. Nathan stood beside her, phone pressed tightly to his ear, pacing like someone negotiating a crisis. Guests who were supposed to be in her hall were seated in mine. Not stolen. Not manipulated. Invited. And choosing. The reception began seamlessly. Champagne poured. Music shifted to something brighter. Laughter rose naturally. Then the doors opened again. I felt it before I saw it. A ripple in the air. Conversations slowing. My parents entered first. My mother's smile was fixed, strained. My father looked confused. Behind them stood Stella and Nathan, fully dressed for their ceremony, but standing in the wrong room. They froze near the entrance. Not because of me. Because of the crowd. Senior executives. Board members. Clients Nathan desperately needed to impress. All mingling comfortably under our chandeliers. Nathan's face drained of color. "These are my investors," he whispered harshly. Stella's voice trembled. "Why are they here?" Daniel's father stepped forward calmly. His presence didn't demand silence. It created it. "Welcome," he said politely. "Can we help you?" Mom attempted a laugh. "Oh, we were just checking in." "On what?" he asked evenly. Stella looked at me then. Not with confidence. With accusation. "You did this." The room waited. I didn't move from where I stood beside Daniel. "No," I said clearly. "I didn't do anything." And that was the truth. I hadn't sabotaged her. I hadn't lied. I hadn't demanded loyalty. I had simply invited people to my wedding. And built something worth attending. Nathan's composure cracked first. "You said this would make her look small," he hissed at Stella. The words slipped out before he could stop them. Several nearby guests heard. Conversations resumed, but differently now. Not curious. Informed. Daniel's father spoke again, calm but firm. "Today is about my son and his wife. If you're looking for your event, the East Hall is down the corridor." It wasn't cruel. It was factual. Security approached discreetly. No grabbing. No force. Just quiet guidance. My mother looked at me one last time, searching for something. Guilt. Apology. Invitation. She found none. Because for once, I wasn't performing the role they expected. The doors closed softly behind them. And the quartet resumed playing. The tension dissolved almost immediately. Like a storm that passed without damage. Daniel leaned closer to me. "You okay?" I exhaled slowly. Yes. More than okay. Because the moment that had once felt threatening had unfolded exactly as it needed to. Without shouting. Without spectacle. Just clarity. The rest of the reception flowed effortlessly. Toasts were heartfelt. Dinner was elegant. Laughter rose without edge. Across the hall, faint echoes carried occasionally, a raised voice, hurried footsteps, something falling. But they never reached us fully. They faded into background noise. Later that evening, as we shared our first dance, I glanced once toward the hallway. Not to check on her. But to acknowledge something quietly. For years, I had believed that fairness required confrontation. That justice needed drama. But standing under soft light, surrounded by people who chose to be there, I understood something else. Sometimes the loudest statement you can make is refusing to move. Stella had tried to create a spectacle. Instead, she created a contrast. And contrast reveals truth more clearly than conflict ever could. As the night continued, guests lingered longer than expected. No one rushed to leave. No one excused themselves for another ceremony. There was no other ceremony left to attend. By the time the final song played, the balance had shifted permanently. Not because I took something from her. But because I stopped giving her my space. And when you stop surrendering space, you stop shrinking. Outside, the rain had cleared. The city lights reflected against wet pavement like scattered stars. Inside, the last guests said their goodbyes. Daniel took my hand again as the ballroom emptied. "You knew this would happen," he said quietly. "I knew gravity would." He smiled. And for the first time, I allowed myself to feel something close to peace. Because the collision had happened. And I hadn't been crushed. The silence the next morning felt different. Not peaceful. Heavy. The kind of quiet that follows something irreversible. Daniel was still asleep when my phone began vibrating on the nightstand. 3 missed calls. 2 messages. 1 from Mom. 1 from Stella. I didn't open Stella's first. I opened Mom's. We need to talk. No exclamation point. No dramatic phrasing. Just wait. I set the phone down and walked to the window. The city looked ordinary again, traffic moving, people crossing streets, life continuing without ceremony. But something had shifted beneath the surface. By noon, the photos had started circulating. Not the staged ones. The candid ones. Executives raising glasses. The grand chandelier glowing over a full dance floor. Daniel laughing mid-toast. Me, not posing, just present. People notice authenticity faster than spectacle. And online, contrast is ruthless. Stella's wedding photos appeared too. Beautiful. Polished. Carefully framed to avoid showing empty tables. Comments poured in on both sides. But the tone was different. Undermine. Elegant. So classy. Power couple energy. What a turnout. Under hers. Why are there 2 weddings at the same venue? Was that planned? This is awkward. Visibility had always been her strength. Now it was exposure. Around 3 p.m., Mom finally called again. I answered. What were you thinking? She demanded immediately. I was thinking I wouldn't move my wedding. You humiliated your sister. I didn't mention her once. That's not the point. It is, I said calmly. There was a long pause. For years, that tone, her disappointment, would have unraveled me. Today, it didn't. She cried all night, Mom continued. I absorbed that. I didn't celebrate it. But I didn't collapse either. She assumed I would change my date, I said quietly. Why? That's different. How? Silence. The kind that forces reflection. Mom exhaled sharply. You've always been more independent. Independent. It sounded suspiciously like unsupported. Stella needs more attention, she added. There it was. Not denial. Admission. She's always needed to win. And I've always needed to adjust, I replied. No anger. Just arithmetic. Mom didn't have an answer for that. After we hung up, I finally opened Stella's message. It was shorter than I expected. Come over. Alone. I stared at it for a long moment. Daniel watched me from across the room. You don't have to, he said. I know. But avoidance wasn't growth. So I went. Stella's new apartment, the one our parents had gifted her, was immaculate. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Marble countertops. Designer furniture arranged with clinical precision. Everything curated. Except her expression. She looked exhausted. Mascara gone. Hair pulled back. For the first time in years, she didn't look composed. She looked human. You won, she said the moment I stepped inside. I wasn't competing. You took everything. I kept what was mine. Her jaw tightened. You always act like you're above it. I'm not above it, I said. I'm just done participating. That landed differently. Because this wasn't about a ballroom. It was about pattern. You could have told me, she said. Told you what? That you weren't going to move. I assumed you knew. Her laugh was hollow. You've always been like this, she said. Quiet. Strategic. Like you're calculating something. I almost smiled. And you've always been loud enough to make people miss it. We stood there, years of imbalance suspended between us. You embarrassed me, she said finally. I held her gaze. You underestimated me. Another silence. This one softer. Less defensive. You think Mom sees it now? She asked quietly. I didn't answer immediately. Yes, I said. But not the way you think. She frowned. She doesn't see that you lost, I continued. She sees that I didn't. That was the real disruption. It wasn't about guests. It wasn't about size. It was about narrative control. For decades, the family story had been simple. Stella shines. I support. Now the script had cracked. I didn't think you'd actually stand your ground, she admitted. I didn't either, I said. And that was the truth. The difference wasn't strategy. It was threshold. I had finally reached mine. She walked to the window and stared out over the city. You made me look small. No, I said gently. You just weren't bigger. That wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. For a moment, I thought she might explode. Instead, her shoulders dropped. What happens now? She asked. Now. Not, how do I fix it? Not, how do I win? Just now. We stop keeping score, I said. Or we keep doing this forever. She didn't respond. But she didn't argue either. That alone was new. When I left her apartment, the air outside felt lighter. Not triumphant. Balanced. Back home, Daniel looked up as I walked in. Well? She's not angry anymore, I said. What is she? Thinking. He nodded slowly. That's more dangerous. No, I replied. It's more honest. That evening, an email arrived from one of the senior partners at work. Incredible event. Let's discuss expanding your leadership role next quarter. Not because of spectacle. Because of presence. Because of stability under pressure. Because people notice who doesn't flinch. I closed the laptop and leaned back on the couch. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the quieter sister. I felt like myself. And sometimes, that's the loudest shift of all. But consequences don't end in one conversation. Because when family dynamics shift, they ripple outward. And the real test isn't the moment of defiance. It's what you build after it. Weeks passed after the wedding, but the aftershocks of that day lingered quietly, like a low hum beneath ordinary life. At work, things changed subtly but unmistakably. Invitations I once declined for minor meetings now came with a priority attendance required. Emails from senior partners included me in decisions I had never expected to influence. My presence, steady and reliable, was being recognized in a way it never had been before. The applause from the wedding had been public, the acknowledgement here was professional and durable. At home, Mom's calls became less frequent. When they came, they were careful. Measured. She no longer assumed I would conform to whatever narrative she preferred. I answered softly, firmly, without excuses. Dad called once, voice quiet over the line, "You've handled yourself well." That was all. Not praise exactly, but recognition. The kind I had never received for good grades, for extra shifts, for decades of quiet effort. Stella reached out next, hesitantly. Not with demands or accusations. Just a message, "Can we talk?" I agreed. Her apartment was still immaculate, though the air felt different now, less curated, more tentative. She met me at the door, shoulders tense, eyes searching. "You won't argue?" she asked. "I'll answer honestly," I said. We sat together, coffee steaming between us. No theatrics. No staged apologies. Just two sisters facing the gap years of imbalance had created. I've been thinking, she began. All those years. I didn't notice how much you did. How much you stayed silent to avoid conflict. Her voice faltered. I always assumed you were fine. I was fine with keeping peace, I said. But peace for me meant shrinking. Not disappearing entirely. She nodded slowly, absorbing it. You finally claimed your space. Yes, I said. And now it's yours to interpret, not mine to hand over. The shift was subtle. It wasn't a declaration of victory. It was mutual understanding, fragile but real. Life outside that conversation continued, naturally reshaping itself. Our parents seemed quieter in their assumptions, watching instead of orchestrating. Stella recalibrated, learning her own boundaries within a space she had once thought was hers alone. And I finally stopped measuring myself by anyone else's expectations. At work, my new responsibilities grew steadily. My leadership, previously unnoticed, now carried authority. Projects succeeded under my guidance. Colleagues looked to me for decisions, not approval. My quiet diligence, once invisible, had become an undeniable force. One evening, Daniel and I sat together on the balcony of our apartment, city lights stretched below. Rain had fallen earlier, leaving reflections on glass and asphalt. He looked at me thoughtfully. You changed more than anyone could see at that wedding, he said. I didn't change anyone, I replied. I just stopped moving for them. He smiled, small and certain. That's enough. It was. Months later, Mom sent a message, unusually casual, dinner next week? I read it, closed the phone, and allowed myself a quiet smile. Not reconciliation exactly, but a pause in judgment. She was testing, not commanding. And for the first time, I didn't feel obliged to perform. Stella called one evening after work. Do you want to meet? She asked. No tension. No expectation. I do, I said. We met at a small cafe, sunlight slanting across the tables. Over coffee, we talked, not about weddings or comparisons, but about life. About work. About plans. About small victories we had ignored for years. No one cheered. No one watched. No one declared a winner. And yet, it felt monumental. The quiet, deliberate choice to hold my ground had created a ripple that reshaped decades of family patterns. Power, I realized, doesn't always shout. Sometimes it sits quietly, composed, unwavering, and lets the world adjust around it. Looking back, the wedding wasn't about the hall, or the guests, or even Stella. It was about claiming the narrative that had been denied to me. About demonstrating that boundaries could be enforced without confrontation, that presence could command respect without noise. That silence, when applied with precision, could be louder than any dramatic gesture. By the time the year ended, I had promoted twice at work. I had strengthened relationships that mattered. My marriage to Daniel continued with the quiet stability I had always longed for. Stella and I, while not inseparable, had reached a new understanding, one built on acknowledgement rather than envy, on honesty rather than assumption. One evening, alone at the kitchen table, I opened my old planner. The pages were filled with meticulous notes, carefully inked records of small victories, lists of tasks completed, and plans executed with precision. I placed the wedding certificate beside it. The two pieces of paper, one marking a legal union, the other decades of personal diligence, rested together under the soft glow of the lamp. I traced a finger over the lines I had written years ago, and for the first time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel overlooked. I felt anchored. Some boundaries, once drawn, last a lifetime. And sometimes, the quietest voice speaks the loudest truth. It isn't about revenge. It isn't about winning. It's about being seen. Being present. Claiming what is yours without apology. And in families like mine, that alone changes everything. The rain returned that night, soft against the window. I left it on, listening to its rhythm as I brewed tea. Daniel joined me after work, settling beside me in comfortable silence. No need for commentary. No need for validation. Just presence. I sipped slowly, eyes on the city lights below, and felt a clarity I had never experienced before. The story had shifted. Permanently. Quietly. Completely. And that is the place where true balance begins.